In 2024, we are celebrating a century of radio, where the world is taking stock of the medium of radio to see where it has come from, how it has benefited mankind. We know that there are 3 tiers to broadcasting, that is public service radio, commercial radio, and community radio. And today, we are going to be focusing on community radio. Welcome to Economic Forum, a program where we discuss various issues affecting our economy in Zimbabwe. These can be issues to do with agriculture, to do with mining, to do with education, to do with tourism, and many other aspects of life. My name is John Masugu. As I've already indicated that today we are talking radio and focusing mainly on community radio in a year where the theme of celebrating radio is a century informing, entertaining, and educating. That is the theme for the year, which is normally celebrated on the 13th of February every year. And to discuss all this about community radio, we have brought into the studio a community radio expert, and that's Amin Yusuf, who has been in this business for a very long time. Amin, welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you so much.
Since I've mentioned that we have different types of radio, let's separate community radio from other tiers of broadcasting, which are public service as well as commercial, so that we understand what it is all about and how it can also benefit the communities.
Yes, when you talk of community media, and in this instance you're talking of community radio specifically, it's a type of radio broadcasting which is organized by the citizens themselves, by the citizens, and for the citizens. Now, if you look at the Charter on African Broadcasting, African countries are supposed to have a 3-tier media system, which is public, like what we see here, ZBC, managed by taxpayers' funds. Then you have commercial or private, which is for profit. Then you have the 3rd tier, which is community radio, which is not for profit, where the citizens themselves organize themselves through a board of trustees or a board, make a decision to establish a radio, and then establish it. They run it themselves, they mobilize resources, the editorial independence is there. Basically, they decide what to broadcast. So that is the difference between community radio and other tiers of broadcasting. But also, another difference is the proximity. This is the type of radio which is much closer to the average citizen. The broadcasting parameters, when you talk of the radius, is much smaller. You're talking if the equipment is not that powerful, and the focus is really for the community. So the proximity is much closer, and that's why in community radio, it's very possible to even hear the names of individuals, the street names, because it's very targeted. It's for the citizens, broadcasting on their own issues of concern. So in a nutshell, that is the main differentiation between the 3 tiers of radio broadcasting.
In some cases, those who form community radio stations are not too sure about what kind of content they're going to put across. Let's talk about the content that is useful for community development through community radio.
No, I don't think they are not very sure of what they want to broadcast. Because for an average citizen, especially who's in the community, the first thing in mind is what are the problems? Whether it's water, whether it's roads, whether it's gender-based violence, or whether it's even economic activities. A small shopkeeper or a small company in the village which wants to gain more market share, selling bicycles or whatever. That's their concern. So you find that the radio, the programming in community radios is guided by the issues of concern of the community radio. You see? I can give you an example. For instance, example from Zimbabwe. When we were conducting community mobilization sessions To give you an example, in Chimanimani, where we were together with the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe, and we went there and met the local authorities. And the first thing we asked the community was, what are the issues of concern here? And they told us. They said, we are seeing instances of, signs of substance abuse, right? We are seeing instances of environmental issues, weather. We have cyclones, we have been hit by the cyclones. So we want the radio to be a solution to these problems. And so you find that after that, even their programming becomes geared towards resolving the issues of concern. So that's how radio programming comes into being. And you find that even the constitution of the board of trustees, you find that it's very aligned to the issues of concern of the community.
The newcomers, especially to community radio, get affected by the commercial and the public broadcasting to the extent that at times you see a repetition of what's happening on the commercial and community radio, yet they have a mandate to actually deal with issues from their community. So how do you move them away so that they remain focused according to their constitution?
First of all, from my experience, I've worked with community radios for many, many years. From my experience, there's usually no conflict between, let's say, public broadcasting or private broadcasting, which is very broad. If you look, for instance, public broadcasting, their content is targeted nationwise. So it's very broad in nature. Whereas when it comes to community radio broadcasting, it's very targeted. So that's where the difference comes. Of course, the issues of concerns at national level. When you're talking of pandemics, you're talking of, let's say, diseases or whatever. That's where the convergence comes. But in terms of conflicts, I've never seen that. And it's natural, it comes up naturally. The citizens want to resolve the economic problems. They want to resolve their social issues. And the programming, yes, because it's citizens-led.
Yes.
So automatically the programming goes that way. Now, if you look at the legislation...
I'll stop you there.
Yes.
I mean, the citizens want to solve their economic problems, and this should be the focus of community radio stations so that the broad issues of the nation are left to the public broadcasters as well as the community broadcasters. That's the issue for discussion here with Amin Yusuf. We are discussing community radio. Zimbabwe licensed 14 community radio stations, and it is still in the process of licensing many more so that these community radios can be used for the development of their communities. So join us in the second segment of Economic Forum. Welcome to the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we're discussing community radio, its value to communities, and also looking at the benefits, the specific benefits that it brings to different communities, because it is community focused. It looks at the community rather than at the broad national issues like what would happen on public media as well as public service media or commercial media. And our guest to talk about that is a community radio expert who has worked in different countries and currently working in Zimbabwe, and that's Amin Yusuf. At times there's the confusion between the other broadcasters, regional and provincial stations with community radio. So if a provincial radio belonging to the public broadcaster is in Gweru or in Ntari, people call it a community radio. Just clarify that so that there's no confusion between a community radio and just a provincial or regional station.
Yes. Okay. I understand there's usually a misunderstanding where we look at these provincial radios as community radios. But I think we need to separate them from pure community radio stations which are run by the citizens themselves. And these provincial radios, in many cases, these are public service decentralized radios, where a public broadcaster decentralizes its broadcasting to a provincial, a local station or broadcasting services, which can even be broadcasting in local languages, etc., etc. But if you look at the structure of in terms of management, they are different. Where from the community radio, for the people, by the people, and for the people, you find the citizens themselves running the show, right? And they are not directly linked to the public broadcast or any other media. So they decide on their own programming. There is no linkages to the public broadcast or whatever. However, they are all part of community broadcasting, I should say, because they target the communities of
and
concern.
they go to the same places to gather news, to talk to people and so forth. But yet, on air, they're supposed to be different.
Exactly. And also the management is different, and the editorial processes are slightly different. Yes.
Now let's look at the steps in actually coming up with community radios. Like I said, Zimbabwe has already licensed 14 community radio stations, which are on air, most of them, I suppose, by now. But how are they established by the communities?
Actually, the establishment of the community radio is citizen-led. It's the citizens themselves who, based on their needs, they decide to establish a radio themselves. So they can go to the chief, as you said, or I usually use the word champion, whoever who has got the capacity to convene them, bring them together to discuss on how to go about the process. Because the process involves first the community to be ready. The entire community say, yes, we need the radio. Then from there onwards, they need to, commit resources. It could be either through the provision of a local building or even constructing a new one. And that needs community engagement. I can give you an example. For instance, at the moment, if you go to Garawa in Chipinge, they are constructing their building from scratch. The women in the village, the men in the village, the young people in the village come together, collect sand, bricks, water, and they've built these premises. So that needs community engagement. So it starts from the grassroots, right? Of course, there are some instances where it comes from the top, where, let's say, a development partner thinks they can support, but they need still to go to the community to get their agreement and to really confirm that, yes, we need it. So after that step, then there are some other technical issues. Of course, in this country, they are led by the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe, who will help the community to do some sort of community mobilization, to start telling them what it takes to establish a community radio station. So the government of Zimbabwe takes the lead in that process through the Broadcasting Authority and Transmedia Corporation.
Transmedia is responsible for the actual transmission.
Yeah, signal carrier.
Yeah, the signal carriers.
So what happens then is they will tell them, look, we need gender equality, for instance, in the board of trustees. You need to have a premises. And this premise have to be in an appropriate location. You don't want the floods to come and, remove that building. So there has to be a survey to say, okay, this building is fit for purpose, or it can be renovated for broadcasting purposes. Is it reachable by all the communities? Is it located in a location where a community member can walk in? Someone has lost their cow. They need to be easily walk in through, knock, and say, look, I need to broadcast. I need to find my cow. So it has to be reachable. Then the next step is the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe will support these citizens to do what we call the prediction coverage map. So they will say, where will we put your transmitters? How high will the mast be? How much transistor power do you need to reach your community?
So there are different types of communities.
Yes, you also have different types of communities because it depends on how the community defines itself. Is it by language?
Geographical,
For instance, if you go to the universities, you're talking of campus radio, which is some sort of community radio, is academic, academic area. So there are different types of communities. But that has to be reached by that signal. So that survey determines the equipment which will be used. And then you come up with a budget of the equipment, the training budget, what training is needed, identify the people who will manage the community radios.
And they're mostly volunteers.
Mostly volunteers. They have to volunteer. There is no, there are no salaries there. But it doesn't mean that they can't be paid. Now, volunteering doesn't mean you can't be paid. These citizens need transportation. They need lunch allowance and everything. So if they can generate income, they can be paid stipends, not salary.
They can be paid stipends, not salaries.
Yes.
We are discussing community radio, which has come our way in Zimbabwe, as you already have some community radio stations. And out there, some of those community radio stations, which are still initiatives, are now waiting to be licensed by the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe. So here you are with more information from our expert here, Amin Yusuf, who is telling us about everything concerned with community radios. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. Sustainability of community radio stations is another very important aspect, because in many countries, most of these community radio stations have been established through donor funding, and communities sometimes get used to that, and when the donors leave, some of the community radio stations actually struggle to survive. So it is important that we talk about how community radio stations can sustain themselves so that they don't have to depend on outsiders. And our guest here, Amin Yusuf, is going to be talking about that. Yes, the donors come in, they help set up the community radio stations, but after a few years when they leave, how can community radio stations then sustain themselves?
Yes, sustainability of community radios is important, because in many cases, as you have rightfully said, many communities cannot establish the community radios themselves. They need support by the donors or even the government or the local governments to establish these radios. But the most important thing is to ensure sustainability is built into these community radios right from the establishment, right from the community mobilizations. You remember I talked earlier about community mobilization, where we bring the communities together. That is where you start to instill this idea of sustainability. The community needs to understand that they need to sustain the radio themselves. So from that point onwards. And the way you establish it, it has to be in a way that you foresee exits. So even the community is aware. So for instance, the choice of equipment. If you choose very expensive equipment, for instance, a microphone which when it breaks down, needs $1,000 to replace, obviously that community radio will not be sustainable. So the equipment has to be basic. The design of the building, everything has to be designed in a sustainable manner. So whether it's, and even there is a sustainability, we talk about financial sustainability, but we forget also there is an issue of programming sustainability.
Talk about that difference, financial and programming,
yes,
and sustainability.
Yeah, and even community sustainability. Without the community, you can't have a community radio. If the community stops tuning to the radio will die. So how do you sustain that audience, right? So sustainability goes beyond just financial, but of course financial sustainability is key. And in this instance, there are several ways. One is advertisements. Where you're talking of local adverts, a local business putting their local adverts there, even football matches, youth football teams playing.
Or any other games in the community.
In the community, you can have live broadcasts, these days with smartphones. But there are also many other ways. For instance, contributions, stationery. Does the community contribute to stationery? Contribute to lunches? I've seen here, for instance, in Zimbabwe, now community radios, there are so many communities which sponsor hampers for the volunteers. But also sustainability in terms of programs is very key. That's very important. Are the programs relevant to the community so that they continue tuned to the radio? So that there'll be more discussions on radio. Because if you look at the media, especially community media, we're talking about community media as a platform for ethical, democratic discourse, where citizens discuss. It's something which brings together the citizens to talk about the issues of concern. So if you have all these levels of sustainability done properly, you'll have community radio sustainability. But the biggest danger of donor support community radio is if, for instance, you establish a community radio, you start paying salaries, then
when you stop that,
the community radio will die. So the community has to grow and learn. It's a process. In fact, establishing a community radio is a process. They have to learn how to sustain it.
Now, talk about the importance of actually, as we talk about economic development, of having programs that really promote the kind, of economy that is within in a community, so that you don't have to ignore it and leave it only to national radio. If your community is a fishing community or it's involved in timber, tourism and so forth, how should you come up with programming that really sustains the stations through meaningful programs that can attract even investors in the community?
Yeah, I think what we should advise community radios in this aspect is the issue of ensuring that the programs are relevant to the community. They resolve the issues of concern. For instance, if the community is involved in fishing, let them bring in experts. And this is where now the linkages comes. Experts who can help the community about fishing.
And also stories from the community about how they've been sustained by
including indigenous knowledge.
Yes.
If you know someone who has got indigenous knowledge on fishing, indigenous knowledge on rice farming, sugarcane, whatever, you bring them there because they're also experts. So the community radio should not work in isolation. So community radios add a lot of value to communities depending on the design of those community radios.
So there you are, community radios in Zimbabwe, those which are already running and those which are still initiatives. Quite a lot of information here and education coming from Amin, who is a community radio expert, giving us different examples about the value and the benefits that we get from community radio. All that remains is to thank you, Amin Yusuf, a community radio expert. If you'd like to get in touch with us, our viewers, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen. If you'd like to engage with us, especially you out there, community radios, want more information, you can do so on the social media platforms that again are flashing on your screen. If you have missed some of the episodes of Economic Forum, you can actually watch them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of Amin Yusuf, a community radio expert, and the production crew, this is John Masugu wishing you happy viewing.